A record-breaking rainstorm hits China. Collapsed streets, flooded subway stations, deaths and injuries, all revealed through social media. An explosion ignites at a metal factory in central China. That's after river water flooded the facility, getting into high-temperature solution inside a metal alloy tank. Today marks 22 years since the Chinese Communist Party began persecuting people who practice Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline. The U.S. State Department calls on Beijing to bring an end to the repression. A Chinese citizen is detained for killing 2 Chinese Communist Party officials. That's after his house was forcibly demolished by order of authorities. And one European country is going against a rule set by Beijing. That's as Taiwan sets up the first ever Taiwanese Representative Office in Lithuania. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A record-breaking rainstorm hit central China. So far, the damage appears extensive, with collapsed streets, cars being washed away, flooded subway stations, and apparent deaths and injuries revealed through social media. Storm clouds dumped a whopping 8 inches of rain on the city of Zhengzhou in just 1 hour on Tuesday. That's equal to 1/3 of the area's yearly average rainfall. 5 national weather stations in the province saw the highest daily rainfall reports since their establishment. An analyst from the Central Weather Station commented on the extreme conditions online, writing on Twitter that this is the strongest rainfall he's seen in his entire career. Video shows torrents washing away cars and flooding subway stations. Media reports say the floodwaters reach nearly 40 inches deep in some parts of the city, and it's only getting worse as the rains refuse to let up. One video shows a street as it collapses amid the rainstorm, seemingly devouring several people. Some social media comments have started to question official reports. One Twitter user writes, "Official media say only 1 person died from the flood, but what about them?" More apparent casualties are still being revealed through social media. The situation has become especially dangerous in some subway stations, while a few lucky ones are rescued. Amid the turmoil, the country's main state-backed broadcaster, China Central Television, has been busy reporting about flooding in Europe and has claimed the Chinese citizens who were trapped in the subway tunnels have been safely evacuated. Flooding in central China's Henan province led to an explosion in a metal factory. The flames went up early Tuesday morning. Just a warning, some viewers may find the following footage disturbing due to its graphic nature. Authorities said the floodwater in a nearby river overflowed the riverbank and caused the factory's wall to collapse. When the water flooded the high-temperature solution in the alloy tank, it set off the explosion. Some local residents said the explosion shattered windows miles away, and window frames almost fell off. Others said the explosion caused a huge shaking, and they were woken up by it. They felt as though there was an earthquake. Chinese state-run media haven't reported any casualties. NTD cannot independently verify the casualties. This explosion isn't an isolated case. Massive explosions in chemical plants occurred frequently in China, causing heavy casualties. According to Chinese state-run media, between 2016 and 2018, there were more than 600 accidents in chemical companies in the country. In 2019, a chemical plant exploded in a town in eastern China's Jiangsu province. According to Chinese state media, it led to about 80 deaths. And 5 years before that, again in the same province, a serious explosion happened in another chemical plant, causing almost 100 deaths. And then in 2015, just 80 miles east of Beijing, a chemical plant exploded in Tianjin City. Almost 170 people died. A number of democratic nations are amassing to criticize China's hacking efforts, but it's not sitting well with the Asian nation. On Tuesday, China's foreign ministry responded, accusing the West of ganging up on China and of making up accusations out of thin air. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Beijing is hitting back at democratic nations. It's over their biggest joint effort to denounce China's cyber espionage. On Monday, they accused China of hacking and stealing valuable information and technology from the US and 11 other countries globally. The United States, European Union, United Kingdom, NATO, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia all urged Beijing to take immediate action to stop its cyber espionage. The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded during a regular press conference on Tuesday. It accused the US and its allies of ganging up on China. The ministry says the espionage accusations were made up out of thin air and called evidence presented by the US insufficient. In an apparent display of tit-for-tat diplomacy, the ministry then accused the US of being the world's top cyber offender. But despite China's strong tone, there was no apparent indication of possible retaliation. And despite China's frequent cyber offenses against the US and other countries, its cyber capabilities are close to 10 years behind America's. A recent research paper by UK-based think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, ranked the world's major countries by cyber power. The US is unparalleled in this domain. Out of 3 tiers, it's the only country ranked top tier. China is a second-tier cyber nation. Beijing aims to surpass the US by 2030, but its core cyber defense currently remains weak. A cyber expert at the institute says the media's unbalanced reports on China's cyber power has led to an exaggerated perception of its actual capabilities. Don Ma, NTD News.
It's been 22 years since the Chinese Communist Party began persecuting practitioners of Falun Gong in China. And today, the U.S. State Department called on the Chinese regime to bring an end to the campaign of repression against those who practice the spiritual discipline. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
In China, over the last 22 years, the Chinese Communist Party has carried out a brutal persecution of the spiritual group Falun Gong. On Monday, the State Department called for the repression to end.
We recognize 22 years since the People's Republic of China launched a campaign of repression against the Falun Gong movement and its millions of practitioners, advocates, and the human rights defenders working to protect their rights. We call on the PRC to immediately cease its campaign against Falun Gong practitioners and release those imprisoned due to their beliefs.
The CCP's anti-religious campaign involves propaganda, brainwashing, torture, and even murder. The regime uses several methods to force practitioners to renounce their faith. Some of those include forced labor, sleep deprivation, and death resulting from having their organs forcibly removed, sometimes without anesthesia. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told NTD the U.S. needs to stand up for the adherents' religious freedom.
And with respect to the Falun Gong, the absence of religious freedom in China is horrific. It is tragic. It's gone on for too long, and America needs to lead the world to ensure that those people have the opportunity to practice their faith in the way they want to.
Some say the CCP launched its violent campaign to eradicate Falun Gong because the practice's core values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance appear incompatible with communist atheist ideology. Tragically, over 4,600 practitioners are estimated to have been persecuted to death, though this may just be a fraction of the real toll given the number of unreported deaths. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China is speaking out on the anniversary. It's calling on governments across the world to end what the Independent China Tribunal calls a state-sponsored, systematic-level persecution of Falun Gong adherents in China. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
A congressman is calling on the Chinese regime to free a detained relative of a Falun Gong practitioner. That's after Chinese police arrested a geological engineer at his home in China.
Chinese geological engineer Zhou Deyong last saw his wife and son in Los Angeles about a year ago. He then flew back to China to care for his ailing parents. Now he's being held in a Chinese detention center with little access to the outside world. Zhou's wife Youling says she was shocked to hear the news.
When I heard that he has been arrested, I was a little bit stunned. How could he have been arrested? The police are supposed to catch bad people. He's such a good man and has never done bad things.
Back in April, police officers raided Zhou's home in China without a search warrant. They arrested him after finding Falun Gong-related books and booklets there.
Then I realized they were targeting Falun Gong because I practice Falun Gong.
Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice. Despite being arrested for it, Zhou himself is not a practitioner. The family's plight caught the attention of Republican Congressman Gus Bilirakis. He wrote a letter to Chinese Communist Party or CCP leader Xi Jinping, calling for Zhou's release. He told the Epoch Times that it's really unforgivable some of the things the Chinese Communist Party has done to these wonderful people. 2 decades ago, the CCP launched a campaign against the practice. Millions have been detained, tortured, while some have even been killed in China since then. Yuling herself was also persecuted. In 2012, she had to spend more than a month in a secret, unlawful detention facility known as a black jail that the CCP uses. Every day, she was fed propaganda materials attacking her faith. The family fled to the U.S. in 2019. But recently, Zhou's parents living in China, aged 87 and 90, are starting to suffer from heart diseases and other health issues.
This time, he's not only unable to take care of his parents, but also the parents themselves may get hurt. As of now, we have been hiding the news from his parents, and we dare not tell them.
Yuling says her in-laws don't understand what was wrong with going back to China to take care of them.
This is his home. Why he can't go back to his home?
Now Yuling has to lie to her in-laws, saying that Zhou has returned to the U.S. Authorities in China are tight-lipped about Zhou's detention. Zhou's family only started to feel something went wrong when Zhou left their phone calls unanswered for days.
Then I began to look for him because I did not know where he was and where he was detained. I first called the local police station, but they did not answer my calls.
It took Yuling a long time to find out where her husband was. Chinese authorities initially denied Zhou from meeting with his lawyer. That was before Zhou mentioned Congressman Bilirakis' letter to them.
When the lawyer told him about me and my son, he started to cry. He said he hopes that we can stay well in the U.S.
Chinese authorities accused Zhou of what they called utilizing heretical religion to sabotage the enforcement of law. It's a common charge that many religious believers have faced in China, and they could face 3 to 7 years in jail.
We used to be a very happy family, but now being persecuted and forced to be separated. I'm also very sad.
A decade ago, a group of Congress members, including Bilirakis, sponsored a House resolution. It called for an end to the ongoing persecution against Falun Gong practitioners in China. Bilirakis says now it's time to bring another one to Congress's attention.
Beijing has been molding people's opinions about Falun Gong both inside and outside China for decades, using propaganda materials attacking the practice. Within China, the CCP created an internet firewall to prevent people from accessing truthful information. And outside China, the CCP is pushing its propaganda through overseas media outreach. Coming up, a Chinese villager killed 2 Chinese Communist Party officials. That's after his house was forcibly demolished by order of authorities. Those who died at his hand were reportedly involved in the issue. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
A villager in China killed 2 CCP officials. That's over their role in forcibly demolishing his house half a year ago. Before this, the villager had been trying to get his case addressed, but to no avail.
Reports of a violent episode in China after one resident's home was forcibly demolished by authorities. A man in Wuhan killed 2 Chinese officials last week after they beat him and threatened his wife. It all started half a year ago when authorities marked his building for a forced teardown with no legal basis. Following the destruction, 4 officials from the city's demolition office inspected the ruins last week. There they ran into resident Xu Lifa.
They rushed toward my father to stop him from taking videos. My father got into an argument with them. They tried to grab his cell phone to stop him, but my father didn't give it. The 4 demolition office officials beat him up. Then my father ran home and took a knife, stabbing one of them on the spot. One of them died and another was severely injured.
After that, Xu went to the demolition office. He bumped into another official who had previously threatened his wife. The incident had triggered his wife's high blood pressure. Xu then killed that official with the same knife. Xu is now detained on murder charges. According to his son, officials ordered the demolition of their 3-story building back in January. It was done in the middle of the night. He says his father was furious and continued to live in the building's ruins. At the time, Xu and his wife reported the destruction to the police. The local police station looked into it and told the demolition officials that no problem had been found with the property. The police filed a criminal case over the property damage in April, but the demolition officials said they found another problem with the building.
We had a lawsuit before the real estate certificate was issued. We have all kinds of legal certificates in hand. We followed the laws to get these, all the documents, and then my father inherited the house from my grandfather. Everything followed formal procedures.
Xu's son pointed out that his father's anger towards the demolition office became too deep, leading to his mental breakdown and the murders. Forced property demolition is a common practice in China. Authorities often decide to take back the land in order to sell or develop it for more profitable projects. Residents usually receive little to no compensation. Former Chinese police officer Liu Xiaobin says the practice reveals a serious social problem in China.
I feel that more and more people in China are treating Communist Party officials as gangs and bandits. This kind of confrontation between officials and the people is getting more and more serious.
Liu says that the regime's leaders not only care less about the lives of the people, but they don't care about the lives of lower-level officials either. He also added that lower-level officials should think twice about the situation and why they continue to serve the regime.
Taiwan is setting up a new office in Lithuania. It announced a Europe-based facility on Tuesday. The office will be named the Taiwanese Representative Office, the first office in Europe to be called such. All Taiwanese offices in other countries carry the name of Taipei, the island's capital city. The unusual naming seeks to comply with Beijing's One China policy. Beijing considers Taiwan as part of its territory and claims mainland China is the only legitimate representative of the island. But Communist China has never ruled Taiwan. The island has its own elected leaders, constitution, and military. In a statement, the U.S. backed the opening, saying all countries should be free to pursue closer ties and greater cooperation with Taiwan, a leading democracy, a major economy, and a force for good in the world. But the move has angered Beijing and comes amid its attempts to isolate Taiwan on the world stage. Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu explained Taiwan and Lithuania are both at the strategic forefront of defending democratic institutions. Wu called the new office in Lithuania very significant. It suggests that some European countries are no longer afraid of angering Beijing and seek stronger ties with Taipei. Only 15 other nations have formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, while many others consider the office an economic and cultural representative office for Taipei. The UK will permanently deploy 2 warships in Asian waters. That's after their Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier traveled to the Indo-Pacific. The UK Defense Secretary announced a decision today on a visit to Japan. NTD's Cos Timmons brings us the details.
As the Royal Navy's Carrier Strike Group sails to the Far East, the British government is sending stronger signals of its strategic tilt towards the Indo-Pacific region. On a visit to Tokyo, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said the UK will deploy 2 ships in the region on a permanent basis.
Following on from the strike group's inaugural deployment, the United Kingdom will permanently assign 2 ships in the region from later this year, as well as contributing a littoral response group in the coming years to come.
In a recent policy review, the government said it will engage more deeply in the Indo-Pacific region in response to the Chinese regime's increasingly aggressive behavior. Wallace says Britain and Japan share a common interest in defending international order.
The UK's Indo-Pacific tilt has similar objectives to Japan's own long-standing free and open Indo-Pacific vision, as both our countries seek to protect and uphold the rules-based international order.
Britain's Carrier Strike Group, led by the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier, is on its maiden voyage to the Far East. Wallace told the Times newspaper that the British fleet will sail on any route defined as legitimate under international law, regardless of China's expansive territorial claims. He says Britain has a duty to insist on freedom of navigation in international waters. Cost MNS, NTD News.
At the start of World War II, 20,000 Chinese Americans served in the U.S. military, despite nationwide anti-Chinese sentiment at the time. Retired Major General William Chen tells NTD why it's important to honor Chinese American veterans.
Who are we? We are American officers. And so everybody should be looked at as Americans, treated like Americans, working as Americans. And so there shouldn't be any difference.
Major General William Chen, fondly known as Bill Chen, is the first Chinese American to wear the two-star rank of Major General in the U.S. Army. During his 32 years of active duty, he experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis while serving in air defense and participated in multiple overseas combat tours, including in Vietnam and Laos. He is also a main advocate for a Congressional Gold Medal to be awarded to the Chinese American veterans who fought in the U.S. Army during World War II.
They were largely forgotten, ignored, or excluded.
Bill Chen's father, Moon Chen, was a World War II veteran serving in the 1st American Volunteer Group to China, and later the 14th Air Force, known as the Flying Tigers. He was also one of the first witnesses to the Marco Polo Bridge incident on July 7, 1937, which marked the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War.
And it happened that my father was flying from Shanghai to Beijing on that very same day, and he saw that fighting at the Marco Polo Bridge. And so immediately he radioed to Nanking the incident, and that probably was one of the first reports of the war, starting with the Japanese.
The next day, Moon escaped from the Japanese by hiding inside a mail truck.
It got stopped by the Japanese at a blockade. The Japanese would open up the mail truck and use bayonets to poke into the mail bags, but luckily my father was in the back and they didn't find him. But as he was taxiing, the Japanese came and they started firing at the plane, but luckily the plane was able to take off and he saved the aircraft.
In the book Unsung Heroes, to which Bill Chen was chief editor, countless more stories of people like Moon were recorded. According to Bill, at the start of World War II, about 20,000 Chinese Americans joined the U.S. Army. 40% of them were not U.S. citizens. This was during the time when a federal law banning Chinese laborers from entering the United States was still in effect.
They served, they defended the freedom that we so much enjoy and we so much take for granted. They demonstrated their competencies, loyalty, and patriotism. They served with pride and proudly served as Americans in spite of the discriminatory aspects of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. Through their sacrifice and hard work, they also enabled the follow-on generations to live the American dream.
Through efforts from advocates like Bill, in 2017 legislation was introduced in the U.S. Congress to honor the Chinese Americans who served in World War II with the Congressional Gold Medal. In February this year, the medal was officially awarded to 12 veterans in a virtual ceremony.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, be sure to check out our latest special report. This month marks the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's founding. But as accusations of human rights abuses grow, one question often crops up: why the Chinese people don't just revolt against the Chinese Communist Party? One important factor is fear, imprinted onto Chinese people's hearts through decades of bloodshed caused by the CCP.
In fact, its fundamental purpose of the killing is to create and maintain an atmosphere of fear, and then use this fear to maintain its rule so that the people don't dare to resist or oppose the CCP.
In this special report, we look at the grueling facts about that killing and even human cannibalism, and why experts warn the world should watch out for the spread of communism, or else risk the same tragedies that happen in mainland China striking in their own backyards. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV. China in Focus is partnering with the platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.